And welcome back to the Team LoCoFit Roundtable. I'm Lauren, owner of Team LoCoFit, and I'm joined with my fabulous co-host, Ryan, who's our training director, and assistant coaches, Jillian, Karina, and Lauren. I nailed that, sort of, I think. Maybe. One day I'm going to do it and feel really good about it, but until that day comes, thank you guys for tuning in once again to the Roundtable. Everybody, we had to take last week off, just things were crazy with travel for everybody. So in case you guys are holding your breath, we are sorry. But we are back with a really awesome topic actually this week, and something that I'm very passionate about. It's something that I really researched a lot actually in my undergrad program, became really just fascinated by it. And that's weight regain. So I think that a lot of people understand the weight loss side of really any equation, right? But people aren't really thinking about weight regain at all. Like it's not even a discussion to them, right? Like everything is focused on weight loss, changing those habits. But then what happens afterwards, right? Because you can't just diet forever. Doesn't matter what your goal is, whether you're just starting out and you want to lose 10 pounds, you need to lose 200 pounds, or you're dieting for a physique competition, or you're getting on stage for some kind of sporting event. Like all diets have to end, or calorie restriction, I should say that, not diets obviously, but any kind of calorie restriction must end. And weight regain is going to be very different for everybody. So the stats are pretty grim. I haven't checked recently, but it's kind of hard to move stats like this. But most of the time, I believe it's like within 3 to 5 years, about 98% of people who try to lose weight regain it. And of course, these are people who are overweight who actually need to lose weight. We're not talking about physique competitors or people who are already lean trying to lose weight. Like this is just like general pop needs to lose weight for health reasons, and they just can't keep it off. They just basically regain all the weight that they've lost. And there's a lot of research actually to show that they can continue to regain even more, which is obviously the worst part about it. So I know we can kind of take this conversation a few different directions, but I kind of want to hear where you guys want to kick it off as far as like physiology, psychology, because they both do go together, but it's a really nuanced topic. So, okay.
Everybody jump at once.
Jill?
So yeah, I think a big issue with like Gen Pop here with like weight regain after a like diet or like the caloric restriction, it's based on the idea that, you know, this diet or whatever program you jump on is temporary, and you go through the program, lose 10 whatever how many pounds in 12 weeks or something, and then you think that's okay, I lost the weight, now I can go back to what I've been doing, and it doesn't work like that. You got overweight or to the weight you were at previously from the way you were eating before and from the lifestyle that you were leading before. So you're going to have to sustain those changes long term, and I think a lot of the causes of that weight regain are because people don't see it as a long-term change. They see it as a temporary decision, just lose the weight and then I can get back to my life. And that's not how it works.
Yeah. And a lot of people diet for an event, right? Or they diet for something, right? Usually people aren't just like, you know what, I want to lose 30 pounds today, right? Like there's usually something that sparks that event, whether it's,
I do.
Well, okay. You want to like gain 30 pounds out of nowhere. So let's be realistic here.
You
Ryan's
can take mine.
Ryan's on the weight regain trail like all the time. But so yeah, somebody's going to do it, whether it's like New Year's or like, oh, I have this wedding coming up, or, I really want to fit into this outfit. I have this weekend that we're going away. So like, it seems it's generally created as a transient. Even if people sign up with coaching, right? They think, oh, I'm going to sign up for coaching, and I'm just going to lose all this weight. And it's going to be this period of, I'm going to focus the next 6 months on this. And then when whatever ends, it ends very abruptly. And then people are kind of left wondering, now what do I do? And there are a ton of physiological things that are happening as you're dieting and you're losing weight, regardless of how lean you're getting. If you're deviating anywhere from the set point, there are going to be adaptations. Of course, the farther from the set point, the more the adaptations. But so you're going to be setting yourself up for this really, really increased hunger that you're not, like, some people just aren't really ready for that. And that's not like talked about a lot. Obviously people talk about being hungry during a diet because you're eating less calories. People think, oh, I'm just going to go back to eating whatever I was before. No. Like, your body is in a position to where it wants to eat everything as much as it can. And you're just looking at hyperpalatable food. You're having these crazy thoughts about food, especially if we are talking about somebody who's doing like a physique competition, right? And now they're super lean and they're like to these very unhealthy, like essential body fat levels, you are going to be so wrapped up in just like this hunger and really just like these ideas of food. So that's a lot of the psychological. And then physiologically, your hormones are pretty much in a place either suppressed or increased to where you're just not in a really good place metabolically to be functioning well. Like your thyroid is down, your sex hormones are down, your cortisol is up, your leptin is down, your ghrelin is up. So all these things are promoting fat gain after a diet, not necessarily muscle gain. So there's some physiological things that are working against you. And then if you just have this, like Jill said, this end date, like, oh, it's over. Okay. That you're in for a very rude awakening, because it's just you're going to gain the weight faster than you can even imagine. So Karina, I know you had your hand up.
So kind of piggybacking off of what was just previously said about, you are spending all this time, putting all this effort in, creating all these very specific behaviors to attain this goal. And then when you come to that end point, I think where a lot of people slip up, and I can speak from this from an anecdotal standpoint, because the first time I prepped, I regained 40 pounds of body fat in 2 months. So I definitely know like how bad like weight regain can affect someone psychologically. But there are some things that I didn't do that now thinking back as I am coming to the end of my prep that I will be doing. And one strategy that could be really helpful is like you create all these behaviors to get down to this specific like set point or goal. But don't throw those behaviors out the window once you get to the finish line. You need to continue to make those behaviors part of your lifestyle. Now, I'm not saying like do an hour of cardio every day for a lifestyle goal, or like eat lettuce at every meal for a lifestyle goal, but still, make nutrient dense foods your priority. Still like be active, like want to be active, still want to train every day. I think people almost burn themselves out in reaching this goal, that they throw all those behaviors away that actually, to a certain point, got them to where they wanted to be. But when you're competing for like to get to an extreme point, it does become exhausting. However, it's not conducive to go from like day and night. You need to continue to have those behaviors and wean those in, or wean them in with a more like sustainable lifestyle environment, which I think will really help with preventing overall weight regain. Because that's something that my first prep I did not do. Like I went from prepping my food like on a specific day and scheduling all that out and making training and cardio a priority. And then I was just so burnt out that I just ate whatever I wanted, trained whenever I wanted. And I went from all this structure and all this like hyper focus to just responding to every single emotion and feeling and craving that I had, instead of still practicing some flexible restraint after the show.
And I was going to touch on something a little different than all of that. I wrote down to respect and accept kind of like your set point. So I wanted to bring up how much genetic and like body composition to begin with and kind of play with this, because there are some people that your weight regain is just going to be a little more than others because of your body type and your body composition and your set point. So for me, for example, to get down to stage lean, I lost exactly 20 pounds. And it is not realistic for me to even stay 10 pounds above stage weight. For some people, that might be realistic, just depending on their genetics and kind of how they're made up. But for me, sitting above stage weight about 20 pounds is pretty realistic. I feel pretty good. And that seems to be kind of my set point range. Now, if I were to go above that, I'd probably start to feel a little uncomfortable, and I have before. And that was more so for muscular development, things like that we talked about before, of why it's so important to be in these surpluses and to not get carried away with the scale. But I just want to point that out there, that just because somebody can stay 10 pounds above their stage weight does not mean that you necessarily can. And that doesn't mean that you're doing something wrong, or you're like doing too much or eating too much, or you're way out of whack. Like that's not the case at all. It's just going to look a little different for everybody. And then kind of feeding off of what Karina just said, I just want to point out that typically the first diet and reverse attempt that you do will probably be the messiest, because I think I've said this in other podcasts before, like we can tell you until we're blue in the face what it's going to be like to come out of a diet, but until you experience it firsthand, you can't really know. And after going through it once, I mean, hopefully that's what we're here for, is kind of make that transition a little smoother, but there are going to be slip ups. It's not going to be a bunch of rainbows, and you get so excited when you're nearing the end of the diet phase for like all this food and all these things, but and then you get there and you're like, I was excited for this, because it's a mental fuck and it is hard. But the first one can really be rough, but it's finding little things that we're able to maybe make the transition back into a reverse or an off season a little easier, holding on to those and then implementing those the next time you do it. So to kind of minimize the extreme kind of rebound that can happen right off the bat if you are not prepared. So we need to be prepared going into the diet. We need to be equally as prepared coming out of it. And I think that's why a lot of people don't succeed. And that's why we see those numbers like Lauren stated at the beginning. It's just because there is a lack of education around the importance of like, what do I do? Great, it's over. What do I do now? And so that's kind of where we step in. But I don't want people to be discouraged by it, but you do need to be aware and you need to be ready to continue on with your diet phase, even if it's not necessarily for the dangling carrot anymore.
Yeah. And just to like really quickly say, I heard Cliff Wilson say this a few times, but it doesn't matter like who you are or like how much you prepare. The first time you diet, at least for a show, is going to be like a culture shock to anyone. It's a very extreme thing that you've never put your body through. Yeah, that first time is always going to be messy, just like you said.
Yeah, and to kind of piggyback off of what Lauren just said, everyone's experience post-diet is going to be different. And you'll be deceived a lot on, social media or something when someone says, oh, we're planning on staying, 10 to 12 pounds over stage weight. And for the majority of people, that's not realistic, or should be like something to look forward to or expect in your own post-show experience. And I also, on top of this, I find a lot of people tying a lot of emotions to a certain weight. So they lose weight and they're like, I'm never going to be 100 and whatever pounds ever again, right? And I've been there myself, this past year or so, I was like, 140 is like my max. Like I will never be that number ever again. And this past year, where did I end up? I was around 140, 141, maintaining in my off season for the most part. Now, was that ideal? Probably, a little over what I was comfortable with, but that's kind of where my body settled. And to get on stage, I have to lose about, from this point, maybe from my starting point, I'd probably have to lose about 30 pounds. So that's a way more than people go into a diet expect. And when you find that set point, it's going to be different for everyone. So it's something you just have to kind of sit with and be okay with, like Lauren said.
Because everybody's, like we said, genetics and their settling point, whatever you want to call it, are going to be different, right? So obviously, Jill, you've had experiences where you were a lot more overweight before, right? So like for your body's already been there, so it's a lot easier for it to go back that way, right? Mm-hmm. So if somebody, and I think we've touched a little bit on this before, but like the people who are staying very, very lean all the time, and this is again two different conversations: physique people and not physique people. People who are staying very lean are people who are naturally very, very just thin. And they just, if they didn't work out, they'd weigh less. There's literally people like that, right? And those are the people who are like, I'm 5 pounds within stage weight. I can get on stage whenever I want. Those are people that's not realistic for most of the population. So especially like you said, Jill, like for your situation, like it wasn't like, you did anything like outrageously wrong that like you should have been like packing on weight or anything. Like it wasn't like that, right? And maybe this different off season, like we'll be able to maintain at a different settling point, right? It's going to be different. And for the Gen Pop person, like this is where it becomes really tricky, because if you're listening to this and you are a competitor, it kind of makes sense, right? It's understandable. Okay, I would love to look like this, but I can't, blah, blah. But what about the person who actually has to lose weight and needs to stay at that lower point now? Like that's actually what needs to be happening, is they need to actually lose weight and now maintain that. And that's why it's really hard for people, especially. So if you've been overweight before, your fat cells have been there before. right? Like they know where they'd like to be. And if you've been there for a prolonged period of time, that kind of becomes that new settling point. Like you can change that, right? But you can also change it on the way down. It's just going to take a lot of work. And it's just the reality. There's 100 million people who have done it. Like maybe that's a little exaggeration. That was some crazy statistics over there. There's a lot of people who have done it, right? I've seen plenty of people who have been overweight before who are now at a normal weight, but it is always going to be work. So it is not to say that like all hope is lost, but you have to understand that you can't just diet and expect to be at that weight, especially if you have been overweight before, or if you are helping somebody, if you're listening to this, you are coaching people who have been overweight or your family member has been overweight. It's not just a cakewalk for them to lose 20 pounds because like, yay, they lost 20 pounds and now they gained 30. That's very easy for somebody in that situation. So it's not that they, it's not like a competitor fluctuating 20 pounds, right? Going from a normal body weight to a very lean body weight. This is somebody who actually needs to lose weight. Now, what do we do? So that's where we have to really employ kind of the habits. Understanding is really the key. Obviously, first, understanding what's going on physiologically and psychologically, and then really keeping those habits into, we're basically just slowly coming out of it. And if somebody is in a position to where they are a lifestyle client and they do have a lot of weight to lose, we're not just throwing a bunch of food at them. Like we talk about, obviously, the recovery diet and stuff like that. That is for competitors who are basically starved to death. That is a whole different conversation than somebody who is, a female who is, 40 pounds overweight, who's just lost 20 pounds. We're not just going to slam a bunch of food, throw food at her so that now she's going to just be gaining a bunch of weight. Like that's a totally different conversation. So I think it's important to know if you guys are listening either for yourselves or for their clients, who are you talking to? And that's going to really change stuff. Ryan, I know you had your hand up. What?
Did I?
Yeah.
It's okay.
I was like, were you just stretching like this?
I actually didn't have my hand up, but I did want to say something. At the end of a diet or a calorie restriction, your willpower and self-discipline is obviously like waning. You're stretched to like your limits with the mental resources you have left. So keeping everything structured as simply as possible and like trying to make exactly what they've said a million times, keeping the habits that you built up in place is going to be paramount because you only have so much willpower. You cannot, test yourself every single day with going out and buying food that you're going to overindulge in or like being around that nonstop. So slowly reintroduce that. Don't just go diving headfirst into the deep end immediately. And that's all I really wanted to say with that.
Yeah, the environment is everything. So environment is the reason that a lot of people, of course, are overweight in general, right? Like we have a very obesogenic environment in general, especially in the US, but in other developed countries as well. It's pretty much the same thing now. Like you can literally order any food that you want. Like there's no longer like, oh, I really want donuts. And then you're like, oh, I'm too lazy to go. You could literally have them delivered if you wanted to. Now, there's also tons of healthier options available now as well. So I think that there's kind of like a balance there, right? There's better access to healthy options, but there's also more access and easier access to like junk foods as well that are just hyper palatable, like we've talked about. It's not that they're bad foods, it's just they're hyper palatable. You're not gonna be like, let me have half a donut. No, you want 16. Like that's just the way that donuts are made. So everybody's environment is really a key factor. So like if you struggled with that before, whatever you struggled with before your diet is probably what you're going to struggle with afterwards. So if you said before, hey, every time I bought this, guess what? I ate it all. Probably not the best thing to have in your pantry because now you've had it out for 16 weeks and now you're ravenous and your brain is telling you need to eat everything in the pantry, even though you don't need to. Those are things that you probably shouldn't add back in. So it's really important to kind of just know yourself. Everybody's going to struggle a little differently. Some people have no issues with food and they're like, I hate going to the gym. I hate being active. I just sit on my ass all day because of work and then I drive and this and that. So some people are just very, very inactive and they do not like physical activity. So for that person, you have to say, okay, we really need to structure it to where like this pitfall, like reverse engineer, how are we going to get moving, every day? Like it can, and again, this is going to be a different conversation to somebody who's just competed at a show, who's burnt out from training versus somebody who has been sedentary most of their life. They just embarked on a short diet and now they're kind of burned out and don't want to do it. So very different. And, for somebody like that, walking for 20 minutes is a really good thing to do versus just not going to the gym at all. So understanding kind of your client, understanding where they're at is really going to help the weight regain kind of situation in the story. So I think that we have to just be very understanding of kind of where somebody is at, work through those pitfalls, understand that there's a lot of physiology and psychology playing into this. And they do play really together. So knowing that, and then you can say, okay, how do I piece together this after diet period? Because if not, you're doing people a disservice if you don't think about what's happening afterwards. And that's really the biggest thing that's happened out of the diet culture, is that people are always thinking about dieting, but they're not thinking about what's happening afterwards. So like, hey, you can diet, but can you actually like maintain this weight that you've lost? Like that is a bigger win, honestly, based on statistics, than anything else. Anybody have any final closing thoughts on that? I mean,
You nailed it, honestly.
It's like, did I do an intro and a closing? No way. I'm going to mess this up. What?
Stop talking.
See, you put your hand up again. What were you doing, babe?
Play with a pen.
Oh, well, that looks like you're raising your hand for you to talk. So anyways, thank you guys for tuning in. We greatly appreciate it. As always, if you have any questions, please let us know. We'd love to hear what you want us to talk about, but also if you have any questions about each episode. If you are listening to this on a podcast platform, we would love if you could subscribe, like, comment, do the whole 10-star reviews. If those are a thing yet, we might just edit it in there. There's a 10-star review. You get extra points if you write that in the comment, 10-star review.
Yeah.
But that does bump it up so more people see this. So we greatly appreciate you guys. And we'll catch you next time.